Watts Gallery is never completely quiet. Even if you are the only visitor, just listen, and you can hear whispers of words, soft snatches of stories and songs. Where are they coming from? From the places and faces you can see all around, inside the picture frames or carved in stone. Every single sculpture or drawing, print or painting has a different story to tell, and wants to tell it just for you. Let's find a story and tell it together. Who could this be? How is he standing? Does he seem strong and confident, unsure or uncertain, or all of those things? Look at how he is dressed. What sort of a person might dress like this? This long, rich red robe is in the style of someone important who lived in Italy 500 years ago. But the painting isn't that old. This is a self-portrait, painted by the artist George Frederick Watts. He began to dress in this way after travelling to a country he had longed to visit, Italy, the home of art. When George returned home to London, some of his friends did not recognise him. No one else in Victorian London was wearing anything like that. George was dressing as an old-fashioned Italian painter in flowing robes and skull-cap. One of his friends teased him and said, "I shall stop calling you George and instead call you something much grander." And she did. She called him Signor. He liked it so much, he said, "Can everyone call me this?" And they did. But he never forgot. His friend was the first. Shall we call him Signor too? Let's say it together. Signor. And the friend who gave George Watts his special nickname can be found in another painting. Come on, let's meet her. Here she is. Her name is Sophia. She is the one wearing the green outfit. George has painted her looking rather like an Italian statue. You can see her shawl draped and folded over her arm. But she isn't alone. Standing next to her is someone else. Who do you think that might be? Do they know each other? Look carefully at their faces. They look so similar, as though they might be, yes, sisters. In fact, that is the name of the painting, The Sisters. It shows 2 of the 7 famous Pattle Sisters. Not in your time, not today, and not in my time, not yesterday, but once upon a time, there were 7 sisters that seemed to shine and glitter just as their starry namesakes. Everyone in London seemed to know their story, how they had travelled across the 7 salty seas from India, where they had lived on the banks of the river, watching ships filled with spices sailing east to west. The sisters were unbelievably rich, glamorous, beautiful, clever, talented, and almost enchanted, or so some folk believed. Their grandfather had been best friends with the King of France, and their father had been a rich merchant, and the biggest liar in the world, people said. Each sister had a special nickname or gift. One was called Beauty. Sarah, who is wearing blue in this painting, was known as Dash, because she was always so busy, dashing here and there. Another sister, Julia, was called Talent, and one day she would become a very famous and very important photographer. As soon as the sisters arrived in London from India, wherever they would go, people would stop and stare. They stared at what they were wearing. Let's take a closer look. How would you describe their dresses? Can you tell how loose and flowing they are? And they are long, right down to the ground. You can't even see their feet. Back in Victorian London, most women wore corsets and crinolines that pinched and were very tight and uncomfortable. Sophia and Sarah did not want to feel that way. They designed their own clothes, which even back then, 150 years or so ago, seemed strange and old-fashioned, and not at all as how other young ladies dressed. It was one summer's day, with the bright sky filled with birdsong, that George Frederick Watts first glimpsed the Pattle Sisters. They seemed to float along the street, loose skirts billowing as the hurly-burly of London cascaded all around them. George and the sisters soon became friends. Sarah wanted to find somewhere new to live, somewhere at the edge of the city where city streets became flower gardens, somewhere large enough for all her friends, somewhere where all the most important painters and poets could meet. George had a brilliant idea. He introduced Sarah and her husband to his friend Lord Holland. Lord Holland showed them around his home and said he was looking for someone to live in another house he owned on his estate, Little Holland House. Sarah loved it. Cool green walls and low ceilings painted with the blue of twilight, and golden planets and stars. Through the windows framed with creepers, the gardens seemed to stretch, and everything was green and sunlit. Little Holland House in the corner of Holland Park, Kensington. It was a rambling gabled house, smart green lawns, stately arching trees. Kensington was on the edge of London, almost the countryside, with the lanes bordered by hawthorns and cherry trees. In the painting, this is where they're standing, and if they turned around they would see those tall green trees. Can you see them? Perhaps it is summer, as the trees are in full leaf. It was there, in that house, that Sarah hosted parties, or salons as they were called. The cleverest, the most famous, the most artistic, and the most beautiful people of the city were invited. George Frederick Watts, of course, was amongst them. But when the afternoons ended and the carriages drew up, ready to take the other guests home, George did not want to leave. He liked it there so very much. He asked if he could stay for a night, or two, or three, a week at the most. He stayed a little longer than that. As Sarah would say, he came to stay for 3 days, and stayed for almost 30 years. He even had his own studio at the bottom of the garden. It was a little small and tumble down, and some friends nicknamed it the Iron Pot. George wasn't amused. It was in his studio one day, after one of the salons, that George had the most amazing idea. He would paint all the famous and beautiful visitors. He would make a Hall of Fame filled with paintings. And he did. The Pattle Sisters were definitely to be included. And so George Watts painted them. This painting, The Sisters, on a summer's day many years ago. Imagine you were there with Sophia and Sarah under that bright blue sky, the clouds so still. They are standing on the balcony upon the patterned tiles. Perhaps after they have finished posing, the two sisters will walk just out of the frame and have an afternoon tea of strawberries and cream. And they will say, "Signor, put down your paints and come and join us." And George Frederick Watts will add a final dash of blue to the sky, turn from the canvas, and walk across the green lawn to where his friends are waiting.